Welcome to assessing and optimizing a SQL Server at the enterprise level. And my name is Ben DeBow, and I also have Angela Henry here as well. So a little bit about myself. I've been in the industry for the last 25 years. I've seen a lot of different things, and my experience is working with a lot of enterprises on optimizing, scaling, and designing a lot of the initial private clouds for SQL Server in the world. And through those experiences, I've been able to see a lot of different things that work and also do not work. I actually wrote a book over COVID. A lot of us had time on our hands, so I wrote a book. And a lot of the things around what I've seen, what I've learned, as well as what I think is coming, is in this speech today, but also in the book. And we're going to be giving away 2 copies to the best questions today. So make sure we interact because it'll be great to hear what you guys want to know. I also have Angela Henry here.
Hi, I'm Angela. I work for Ben. I am also a Microsoft MVP. All of my contact information is on there. I am also a helper here at BITS. I'm not in orange this morning because I'm up here speaking, but I will be in orange later on today. And a huge round of applause for our orange people today, the Orange Army as they are known, because we could not do any of this without them.
And your feedback is important. So the way I learn, the way I grow, one is by mistakes, but also listening and understanding from you guys. So make sure you guys give us feedback so how we could become better presenters and educators for you guys in the future as well.
So the Pareto principle. So this is, I don't know, show of hands, has anybody not heard of the Pareto principle? We've got a few folks. All right, so the Pareto principle says in business that 80% of your business comes from 20% of your clients. All right, we're going to essentially apply that to our enterprise data platform and see how that translates to how you can optimize and assess your environment. Which button are you pushing?
The enter.
Oh, enter. Sorry.
Yeah, because when you think about technology and we think about optimization, we're using the word optimization today, right? And that can mean many things to many different people. But why are we optimizing? How many people actually had their IT budgets increase next year? A couple people. What percentage was it increased? By a lot.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I want to come work for him, Ben. Sorry.
I know. Go for it. Because a lot of people probably want to know how you did that, right? Correct. Yeah, but even the budget being increased is important because most people, how many people had their budgets cut? Anybody had them cut? Or most of them are a couple people.
Few, yeah.
And most of them are relatively flat, right? What's happening in technology? We're all data professionals in one way or another. Our data is growing at 23% compounded annual growth rates right now. That's the average across the world. I don't know what your growth rate is, but it probably grew higher or more than your budget grew. And then you think about your business. A lot of these businesses are growing, or your transaction volume is growing as well. And then how are we supposed to innovate with the business? Because the business wants us to innovate with AI, all these great new technologies, but they're not potentially giving us the money to innovate with, but they want us to innovate more as they know that technology is an enabler for the business. So how are we going to manage all these new demands of innovation and building things for the business while minimizing our spend, but then to be able to still support this 20 or 30 years of legacy technology that we have out there today? That's one of the challenges. That's also why we're going to be talking about optimization. So within your organization, there are many different areas that we could optimize in to, I call it, save costs / then we could reallocate that spend to be able to support some of these new technology initiatives so that you guys can innovate without spending money because technology does cost money. I threw this in there. It's sort of related, sort of not, because I am big into I like the environment. I like hiking. I like biking and so forth. But I own a couple technology companies. So you think about, I'm around technology all the time. Back in the day, a rush job was 1 week. We said, hey, can you get this to us in 1 week? And then all this technology is coming, fax machines, modems. Now we have smartphones. Now we have a lot of other gadgets. We have AI automatically doing lots of stuff for us. And then sort of driving this other thing about immediacy, right? With microwaves, I can't wait 6 minutes for this thing. What's going on? So I think as we are innovating, let's also remember that we also have time. We need to remain balanced, right? So make sure we're balancing what we do and with what time we have. But ultimately, the cost of our designs. So as we are designing the next generation AI platforms, analytical platforms, technology solutions, if you're doing a new cloud migration, et cetera, every decision that you make in there has a cost. And a lot of times we don't think about it because we get so focused on the technology. We're thinking about the newest features that are being released from Microsoft or whatever the platform is. But ultimately, what is the cost of our design, right? When we're building that new application, one of the things that I realized is this. If Angela is building a brand new app and I give her a budget of $1 million, yep, and we just signed it, she gets all excited. She goes and gets a design team, project manager, builds out a project, and we give her a due date of June 30th, right? Sort of
Absolutely.
tight. Can you do it?
Sure, we can do it.
Yes. So we build our team, we design it. How we build that architecture, there's many different ways. How we build it will influence our costs later on. So we start to build. Who we have code our system will determine our cost later on. So we go and build it. I'm ready to deploy it, Angela. What size server should I deploy this on?
The biggest one you got.
Not the smallest?
No, the biggest one you got.
Okay.
I want it all.
Yeah, because we don't want to de-risk. We want to de-risk ourselves. We don't want to deploy it on the smallest. So what do as technologists? We deploy it on the biggest. So we go, and now we're in production. So remember, I gave her $1 million. We just deployed, and now my monthly budget is $20,000 that I'm operating on. So then my first year, before I brought on anybody, grew the business and the data, it's $20,000. Do apps run for 1 month? I have apps that are running for 25 years at some of our clients. And a lot of you guys also have that as well. So what did we just do? We focused on the $1 million of building the app. We didn't focus on the 20 years and what that technology will cost us. And that goes back down to the design, the quality of the code, the data type decisions that we make, all up front. It has that long-term impact and effect. And the other important thing is, why am I even talking about cost, right? And the other challenge is we all talk different languages, and not just from in English versus German versus Dutch, etc. But we all have different backgrounds. How many developers are in here?
You got
A couple
few.
developers. What about infrastructure? A couple infrastructure. What about data engineers, DBAs?
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
A lot of, yeah. Any business people in here? No
One?
business? Yeah, the
There was
business didn't
one.
come to a technology conference? Well, think about this. As data people, I could go have a great data type conversation with Angela, right? Infrastructure people, vCPUs, memory, storage, bandwidth, right? We'll talk that. Developers, I will talk about .NET, libraries, all this other fun stuff. What's the one language we all speak? Money.
Money, that's right.
Money. But most of the time, we don't think about how do we communicate to the business around the cost of technology, et cetera, to get them to prioritize our optimizations. So the reason why I'm talking about this, it's so important also how we communicate to be able to sell what me and Angela are going to talk about in just a second. Many times, financials will help us get the decision green lit for us to get that prioritized, because they are so focused on the product roadmap that they forget that we potentially have some tech debt or optimizations to make in the environment that will actually save hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars over the 5 or 10 years. So we're going to talk about how you guys sell that, where those are at, and so forth. But first thing we want to do is say, well, what level do we optimize at? Many of us, developers, database administrators, we have the classic saying of, let's go optimize the top 10. Angela's going to say, as a developer, she'd say, Ben, can you give me the top 10 worst statements in this database? So I run a query, and I give her that code. And what does she do? She'll go and tune the top statement. And she makes some progress and promotes that in. what did I potentially just do? Maybe I saved 30% because she just optimized the most toughest query in there. But at the same time is, what did I potentially save? And that's a licensing value. So SQL Server, every 2 vCPUs is roughly about $15,000 for Enterprise Edition. So that is what I saved. Now, what about if I'm looking at it from an enterprise perspective? Did you know that a lot of the code runs across the environment, whether or not it's on prod, non-prod, meaning QA, dev, UAT, or there's other processes in your environment, think about auditing and logging. How many of the DBAs have like a DBA database that they deploy out to your server?
Yeah.
Several of us, right? We probably wrote that a while back. You know, I know that I wrote some code in 2004 for a client to capture some perfmon data, exec request data, connection data. That's still running today. And it's funny because that client still talks to us. And I was like, wow, you guys still have this data? And they're like, yes, they're very proud of it. And I'm like, you guys have not archived it or purged it. You probably don't need data back to 2004. So I was like, well, since we have it, I might as well graph it and see this graph that does this. But what did we just do? You know, we just designed a database that goes across all the environments. So one of the quick things as far as the story, we were working with this very large, I call it financial organization, and they're trying to scale this very big platform. And they're like, we do not have any more space and I call it capacity to be able to perform. So we looked at their implementation, not only of that system, but we have technology that looks across the enterprise. We said, well, let's actually just look at what is being used as far as resources. And we noticed that their DBA utility database was #1 on the list. And we're like, wow, your DBA database is using more than your core revenue generating system. And it's because they were capturing exec requests every 5 minutes, and it went back to 2006. So that's billions of records. Then they were capturing all this other data that they thought people might know. And they were even capturing every connection that came in every minute. That's it, guys. #1 is, why do you need this data? And Angela's going to talk a little bit about this later on. But at the same time, is they then are accessing that. And then they didn't tune the indexes for that. They didn't think that people were going to access that data. Then you think about the processes to be able to insert and scan that. It ended up being 45% of their implementation as far as licensing. 500 vCPUs were being attributed to the resources from that one database that they owned that brought no value to the business. So the one thing I always say, if you do have a DBA database, take an hour or 5 next week, quickly go and say, do we have something that deletes data? Do we need this data? How long? And make sure that you quickly index it. And the example is, I could save, if I save 30% because I tuned a process across this environment, 744,000. And we just looked at code from an environment, and one piece of code, which was in a SaaS. Any SaaS companies in here? One? And then do you have a database per client? Yes. Okay. So you're in a very good position. Why? Because if you look at that code runs, and how many databases do you have? Hundreds. Yeah. So maybe hundreds or 1,000. So if you can optimize one piece of code in, so say he has 100 databases, that's 100 times whatever that percent of that code is of that system. And that's how you get very big wins across the enterprise. So one of the first things that we do is we start at the system level, the configuration level. Why? Low risk. It's easy. Very, very quick wins. So you think about data compression. If I enable data compression, I could potentially either get 15% up to 80% compression rates on indexes. Certain SP configure values I could set as well. Different things I assume. So when you think about a database, how much free space do we want to have in that database? The difference between 10%, 20%, and 30% across maybe 1,000 databases, that adds up. That one decision just costs you money. If you go from 10 to 30 and say, I want 30% of my database free, that actually equals 20% more in money than somebody says, I want 10% free space. So if you have a process that sort of looks at the free space every so often, it will actually make a difference, because then you could save that other 20%. Those little decisions, think about it as what's the cost implication of that very simple decision, whether it's a threshold, whether it's a configuration. I sort of mentioned common databases, so I'm not going to go back over this in detail, but think about the common things. Another great common database is MSDB. So MSDB is great, but if you have any processes that run a large number of jobs on your system, make sure you're configuring some of the retention and purge. And MSDB does not ship with a couple of indexes that are optimal for environments that have very large numbers of running. And if you add those indexes and you manage that, your costs will go down. Your blocking will actually go down across your enterprise as well. If you do not add those indexes and so forth, your MSDB and your costs will actually be higher. Maintenance process is another one where, depending on how often I run my indexing, statistics, backups, etc., those are all things that cost money. So if we run all the different processes in non-prod every night, what's non-prod used for? Usually functional testing. Do we need to run rebuilds every night in non-prod? Because when I run that process, that's using compute. If you're in the cloud, I'm using more compute. I'm using more bandwidth. I'm using more memory, right? So make sure that we are being smart around where we run our processes and how we run our processes. Usually non-prod is not related to performance. Usually it's functional. Let's design it for that. Let's not run all of our processes that we do in production to make things fast. So those are some of the things that we focus on, and this is all low-hanging fruit. We haven't even started talking about code or process and some of these other things. I'm going to let Angela talk about some of the data.
Yeah, so along with your DBA utility databases, how many people have multiple copies of tables within their database? Yeah, come on. I know. There's only 2 people are raising your hand. Everybody else is lying. Everybody makes a underscore backup, an underscore temp, an underscore this is mine, don't touch it, an underscore delete me, all those kinds of things. And they do that for a very specific purpose, because they want to test functionality so that they don't interrupt anybody else's development process. And then what happens? You start building artifacts on top of those things, and then you can't delete them. So that is another really big win. Go back through, make sure that you clean that stuff up. Don't let it sit out there forever. Ben and I were talking about this earlier today. I had a client who had, I think, about 20 copies of a single table that had several billion rows in it. Yeah, that's kind of a waste. So those are, like Ben said, really low-hanging fruit that you can clean up right away. Your data lifecycle. This is really important, especially if you are in a regulated industry where you have that liability if you keep your data longer than you are supposed to. So you have that legal piece, but also you're storing that data. And everybody says, oh yeah, storage is cheap, no problem. Well, it's not just the storage cost for that data, because you also have to process that. So you're taking out CPUs. If you're using in-memory tables, now it's going to take up memory. So your data lifecycle, you need to really be working with your business to determine what that data lifecycle is and implementing automation to archive your data. Don't let it just sit there because people are afraid that it might break something. Most likely it's not. Now, there are some industries that keep data longer than others. Work with your business, but don't hang on to it forever. And make sure that everybody understands and automate that process to archive that data off so that you're not storing it forever. Code and index strategy. So, as Ben kind of alluded to, with the DBA database and MSDB, we don't always put the right indexes on things. MSDB has shipped without those indexes forever. As an MVP, we've raised this to Microsoft, and they're like, yeah,
They won't listen to you, MVPs?
Not all the
Oh,
time.
man.
Not all the time. And so it's just kind of one of those deals. So you have to understand, I had another client who was complaining. It was a reverse logistics company, and they said their performance was super slow, but they also ran their reporting off of their transactional system. So what the report writer did is they went in not understanding the transactional piece and ran the data tuning wizard that said, hey, add these indexes, everything will make your stuff faster. So by the time, by the time I got in there, there were more than 30 indexes for the same column. And I was like, oh, well, gee, I wonder why it's slow. So doing research, combining all of those different indexes together, I got it down to one index with an include, and lo and behold, all of their stuff ran 45% faster. That is a really big win for them, because reverse logistics, I don't know if everybody knows this, but reverse logistics is when you have items from a store that need to go back to a warehouse because they didn't sell, they were defective, whatever. So when the truck pulls up, they unload it, and you have somebody there scanning things. It's just like at the grocery store. How many times have you stood at the grocery store and you have to wait because the scanner doesn't work or it's slow or whatever? In reverse logistics, that is super important because a lot of those workers are they're paid by piece. So as many times as they can scan something, that's how they are paid. So that was a huge impact for those warehouse workers. So there are all kinds of side effects here. I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
It's funny, we sort of alluded to this in SaaS applications, right? Or every time you have the same database, and it also works within organizations as you back up and restore your database multiple times, that same code base. And whenever you think about, looking at top down, we're going to show you something in a second that looks at code top down, because that same code, and that's where you could get multiples of savings once you actually look at it from an enterprise down. Non-production configurations, right? This is one of the biggest ones that we don't think about. As soon as we deploy non-production, developers will usually ask for bigger boxes, just like Angela, when we went to production, said, I need larger infrastructure, right? But ultimately, a lot of our non-production boxes can be all like 4 vCPU, probably 16 gig boxes. And then what that does is allows us to still meet the functional or business requirements, but not spend a large amount of money here. And then this is, by making that one design decision or business decision, we're actually saving licensing, operational costs, and also hardware or infrastructure costs as well. And many of the people we've been talking to today, we don't realize cost of code, and code actually has cost. And it's interesting how many people think about when you're designing your piece of code or writing your code or optimizing code, however everybody ever think about what this has cost me over the next 5 years. Have anybody ever thought of that? A lot of times we're focused on the sprint, the release. Does this code work? If it works, I feel like I did my job and I'm promoting this up to the next environment for testing. And then what do? I go on to my next piece of code. Ultimately, it has a cost. And a lot of times we are thinking cost in terms of CPU, memory, and storage. Well, that is absolutely a cost. And usually it's directly related with a financial cost as well. So what I want to do is show you a little bit about the way we look at it.
You have to just duplicate instead of...
Was it...
Windows P.
You want to do it?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you drive the car?
There you go.
Perfect. Look at this teamwork that we just did here. I mean, we train on how to do this, and it just happened. It's amazing. So let me go into here.
So the product that Fortified Insights makes is called Wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to show you here to help you get that cost of code.
So up here is KPIs. I'm big into, a Garmin watch and this Oura ring, which I love. It told me my sleep score when I flew over here was a 51. Usually it's like 80 and 90, and I knew that I didn't sleep well. but it actually said you didn't sleep well. Those scores across the top are sort of what we look at from an enterprise perspective. The thing I want to show you today is this. So here is cost. Over here is code. So as we talk about being a developer, being a data analyst, a lot of times we're thinking about CPU, thinking about I/O, right? Top statements, query, DMV. We all have that in our toolkit, right? This code right here is the same code. It's across the enterprise. So we ignore the server. The server is nice, but that's the equivalent of me tuning and optimizing one database on one server. If I want to look at the code across the enterprise, I would never be able to see some of this code unless I step back. And what we do is we step back inside of here on everything, from blocking chains to deadlocks to code to data as well. And what we're doing, I have a financial background as well. So I have that financial background and a technology background. And I realized, I'm like, we need to merge these two together, because whenever I hear developers try to tell their boss or their leadership that we need to fix something, we always talk technical language. I say, hey, this piece of code used 8 days of CPU. We need to fix this. I don't know what 8 days of CPU is. If I said this code costs me $4,600 to run in a week, it does? And by the way, that code costs $110,000 to run in a year. And one of the things that we do, and this goes back to the Pareto principle? Pareto. I mispronunciate a lot of things. It's this. Look at this. Top 10 statements equals 78% of the performance. This is similar across environments. 40 to 80% is the typical. And we're going to give you the actual number at the very end that we see across all the environments that we touch. And we say, well, how do we actually optimize some of this stuff? Because one of the things that we never realize is this line up here runs in 3 different environments. So the cost is actually, and if I tune that one statement, which actually looks like 3, but it's the same statement, I could potentially save a certain amount of money. Here, this is $2,500 that we could potentially save. But we could also better communicate, because if we do not get the time or the priority to save that, then how do we better communicate to the business? One of the things that we did was we said, well, let's help look forward. In technology, a lot of times we're looking backwards. What did we do last week? What did we do last month? Give me the top worst. Give me the history of something. I think the financial service industry did a great job. They look forward. And we like big numbers. So if I said I could save you 5 cents on a query if I tune this query, how many of us would spend time on it? If I said that I could save $50,000 to tune this query, now we need to spend time on that. Why? That query that costs 5 cents, if it's executed 10 million times every day, times 365 days, that query will add up. How I communicate is very important to whether or not I get my leadership to listen to us. So I think if you can, in your conversations, speak in terms of the future, in bigger numbers, and in dollars and cents, and people are getting priorities changed at their organization. So, yes? Great question. So one of the things that we're doing...
How do you compute the cost is the question.
Yes. How do you compute the cost is based upon 2 different factors. If you're in the cloud, we can interpret the cost from the cloud, right? But one of the things that we're doing, because on-premise, a lot of us still have servers on-prem. What we're doing is taking a like-for-like server in the cloud and bringing that cost down, or the clients can actually put their own costs in there, okay? So what we do is day one, when you install, is to be able to take that cost from the cloud on a like-for-like server so that we actually have costs for on-premise. But that also helps organizations that might be going to the cloud, because then they can start to see, what would my cost be if I was in the cloud running this similar server? We're actually showing you that in here, along with what the code would look like as far as the cost perspective as well. Did that answer your question? Correct. Yeah, based upon resource reservations, and this does allow us to have a different conversation with our peers to understand this does have a cost. Where are our larger costs coming from? Because frankly, there's millions of lines of code that are being executed in every one of your systems every day. A very, very small amount actually equal the big cost, right?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, so cost of data. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. You're storing everything forever. We don't want to do that anymore, not only from the actual physical implementation cost, but like I said, you've got legal implications as well. So, but not just the storage of the data, but because you have all of this data, it's going to take longer to process it. So how many people in here have ever used analysis services? Yeah, lots of hands going up. How many people have had to partition their data, yep, a few hands, on an hourly basis because their partitions were so large? Yeah, that's a lot of data. And that is a lot of work behind the scenes. That's a lot of processing power, not just storage. All right? So there's more than one cost of data when we talk about, I mean, everybody says storage is cheap, right? You know, I think one of my previous employers, if I'd said storage was cheap, the sand guy would have ran me over. That was quite a while ago, but when we still had sands. But yeah, storage is cheap, but it still costs. And as Ben said, if you talk dollars and cents with the business people, they understand that. So if you can assign a cost to that, you're going to get your budgets approved more often than not.
Yeah, and there's actually an interesting story. There's an app that we've been working with for 20-some years that I actually helped put HA and DR in back in the early 2000s. And it's funny, the guy's name is Andy. He was the data architect there. He's still there today. And he went to the business, and there's a table that has 3 billion and some rows in there, and only stores when they sent emails out. For this, it's a hospitality system. And he said, this data is not worth anything, right? They're not doing any analysis and so forth. So he goes to the business and says, hey, can we get rid of 90% of this data? He looks at it and says, oh, no, let's just keep it. Because it's easy for the business to say, let's just keep it. Because it's a pain.
Storage is cheap.
Yeah, it's a pain if we have to go through this. Well, let's see if legal needs it, security, privacy, regulations. I said, well, Andy, what about if you would have said this, okay? You know, we would like to purge 90%. If you do not want to purge it, we're going to charge you $20,000 to retain it. And this is just for one table. I don't need that data. I don't have that in my budget, right? It changes what they do because they think it's easy by just keeping it. They don't understand there's a cost.
Absolutely. Ben and I had this conversation earlier. So how many U.S. folks do we have in the office or in the audience today? A few folks? Okay. So there is a U.S. television show called Hoarders. I didn't know this prior to this morning because I don't watch a lot of TV, but it's about people who hoard things. You know what? If you are in data, you are a data hoarder because nobody wants to get rid of anything. Let's keep it all. We never know when we might need it. That's the Girl Scout in me. Always be prepared. But no, we don't need this data. We don't need to keep it. Obviously, there are regulations for some stuff.
That's why we had the shredding on there.
Yes.
Yeah, just in case.
We don't want you to be a data hoarder because that's very, very expensive. To prevent data hoarding, you need to come up with an enterprise data strategy. Work with your business because they know what they need. You need to work with your legal team. You also have to take into data privacy. We're in Europe. GDPR. Who's never heard of GDPR? Yeah, not a single hand. That's data privacy issues. So we need to take those into account. And remember that data life cycle. Most places, if you keep data beyond 8 years, you're actually in violation of certain compliance regulations depending on the vertical that you are in. How many people actually knew that?
And one of the challenges
not very many.
And one of the challenges also, Angela, is how many of these 20-year-old apps were ever built with data archiving and lifecycle in it?
Absolutely.
Not many. I mean,
none.
So.
None, because we were building this thing to only last for 5 years. How many people have ever built an app to only last for 5 years and it's only lasted 5 years? Show of hands. Not a single one. So it's the value of that data. Those are the things that you need to kind of keep in mind when you are building your enterprise data strategy. Don't be a data hoarder. So how do we get to this enterprise level thinking? We have to use a holistic approach. We can't just work in a vacuum as IT people. We need to talk to the business. We need to talk to the developers. We need to talk to the DBAs. We need to talk, as IT people, this is scary. We actually have to talk to people? What? Yes, you do. You have to talk to people. You have to collaborate. You have to make sure that everybody is on the same page and understanding what your enterprise level thinking is. And then scalability and performance. You have to keep that in mind when you are designing your systems. If you are designing your systems, like Ben said, for just this one little piece of code, but that one little piece of code is going to execute 5 million times in a minute, that really better be optimized. So scalability and performance are very key when you talk about your enterprise level thinking. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ben.
Yeah. So one of the other areas that we just showed you was code, but we also have costs of data. And it's interesting of how many copies people have of the same database across enterprise, which goes to the enterprise thinking. So earlier I mentioned your design decisions have a cost. So if Angela says, Ben, I would like to have a copy, or I need this data, right? Ultimately, I could say, well, just take a backup, restore it, you're good, right?
Oh yeah, there's no problem restoring prod to dev, right? Doesn't matter what vertical you're in, like healthcare, finance, it's okay, right? Everybody does it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the cost implication? 100%. I just duplicated my data. And then, somebody else wants it. Now, backup, restore. What happens is I end up with multiple copies, and these are low counts. We've seen 20 and 30. And we've also seen it of the enterprise data warehouses, because the enterprise data warehouse is built for the enterprise, right? Well, they have a security and data distribution model that sort of limits. So if anything, let's copy it. I've seen 22 to 30 copies of the warehouse where it equals over 50% of the total storage footprint. So how do we have a conversation? Hey, Angela, you have 6 copies of the database. Is that bad?
No, I need them all.
Yeah, but they cost $82,000 a year.
Oh, all right. Well, let me. No, I don't need them all. Never mind.
Yeah. So
I want to go on vacation and get a raise next year.
Yeah.
So no, I don't need them all.
Yeah, and when we think about cost, let's just say that you tune a piece of code, or you drop some of this data. How do you communicate your win to the business? Well, let's annualize that number too. So by having this data, and this is something that we're putting into Wisdom. When you tune a piece of code, if it costs $110,000, and by the way, I tuned it down to $1,000 for that year, we'll be able to say that you saved the company $109,000. Well, all of a sudden, if you tune 10 pieces of code over the year, you could easily report. This type of feedback loop is very important. So this goes down to the table level. So now you know what the cost of tables are. So if you have those BKP tables, those temp tables, those don't delete me tables, now we could attribute a cost. You get this great idea from this session in here today, and you come in here and say, I'm not being a data hoarder anymore. I'm going to drop all these tables. You save a terabyte of space, and that terabyte is worth this over the year. That's the win. That's the conversation that we want. So I'll put it back over here.
All right. So also part of your data strategy is data governance. So, Ben just said, yeah, we don't need all that stuff. Let's just delete it. We need to make sure that we're not just wholesalely deleting things. We do have to have some data governance in place to make sure that we're not deleting things that we shouldn't be. And we also need to be able to track lineage back to why things are where. Our data integration. Make sure that everybody, your devs, your developers, your business people are all on the same page when it comes to your data integration. We don't want 20 different tools that we're using to move data around, because when you use 20 different tools, that's probably because you have 20 different people, and then that means that you've got 20 different copies of that data in different places. If everybody's using the same tools, that helps a lot. And then again, your data lifecycle management, get that defined, talk to your business. They need to tell you what your data lifecycle is. How long can we keep data? And we don't keep it a day longer than that. And let's put automation in place to make sure that we're not keeping it when we don't need to keep it. So what if we don't have a solid data strategy? Well, it's going to cost us a lot. We just talked about, Ben just showed you in Wisdom, the cost of data, the cost of code. It comes with increased cost if you don't have a solid data strategy. Those data silos and inconsistencies. Remember, people are using different tools across your enterprise. You now have data silos, multiple copies of your data. So when the CFO is presented with metrics on your total sales and he's getting 5 different numbers from 5 different people, who's right? That's a problem. You can't make informed business decisions if you've got data silos and inconsistencies. And then that leads to missed opportunities. It absolutely leads to missed opportunities. So you need to make sure that you've got that data strategy in place and that everybody is playing on the same playing field. Back to Ben.
So remember the 80-20 rule? 80% of the money in a business comes from 20% of the clients. So we talked about where does the majority of the cost optimization, cost potential savings come from within technology. 1% equals 50%. We had to name the principle something, so we named it after our company. But at the same time as this, it's as we look across the enterprise, top down, across all the code, independent of servers, all the data, independent of where it lives, the amount of optimization that we have within the 1% of the code equals and is usually greater than 50%. So when you think about you're moving to the cloud, and even if you right size, you prepay and reserve your instances and you get a save, ultimately organizations think that they have to refactor the whole application, redesign the whole application to really save the money. What we're finding out and advising clients on is you need to focus on the top 1%, which is in contributing to the majority of your cost in database and applications. That's going to give you a large enough save to migrate with a lift and shift with a slight refactor. It's not refactoring 30%, it's refactoring the 1% that drives the cost based upon the enterprise top-down view of your application. One of the things that I talk about in this book, and also when we think about what we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years, it's our acceptance criteria within applications. Today, we accept based upon functionality, right? But as we're moving to a consumption model, like, I'm charged per usage, whether it's storage or compute, cloud, or even on-prem, they're doing different chargeback mechanisms within organizations. I think that for us to get ahead of this, we need to think about what do we accept changes within your environment on. Today, it's functionality. In the future, I believe it's going to be cost or efficiency, one of those two. And I believe there's going to be an environmental aspect to that because carbon, a lot of times, has a direct correlation to compute based upon energy consumption, et cetera. FinOps is a big topic these days. Why is it a large topic? Because the CFOs want to understand what the heck are we spending all this money on within the cloud. Technologists are trying to explain that it's needed, required technologies, and this just costs a lot. Well, they want answers, and that's where you start to apply some of the concepts in here as far as cost of code, cost of data. But ultimately, if we are only fixing it after we went to production, after the CFO complained about the bill, we need to go upstream. Upstream is within the development lifecycle. So before you promote your code up to QA and UAT, I think we need to think about the budget. Let's put budgets on pieces of code or areas of the application. If I promote that code and it doesn't meet that cost, Apple does this. All the large organizations do this because Apple will say, hey, you have 100 milliseconds of CPU time or else your code will not get promoted into their newest 3D goggles. My friend had to get her team to build within that spec. What happened? It was able to be promoted up. If we have a budget and that code exceeds that budget, we should not promote it up. We should optimize that a little bit more, or else we will continually have higher and higher technology costs. This is our contact information. And if you'd like to learn more, there's a barcode up there. But what questions do you guys have? Yes. Yeah, so I'm going to answer your second question first. And do we plan to support other platforms? Yes, we plan to support other DBMSs and all app code longer term. And Oracle's probably next on the list because their vCPUs are $50,000 per CPU, and a lot of organizations are moving away from them. The first question is, I'm going to summarize it a little bit and let me know if I got this correct. It's what are some of the different algorithms and so forth for the on-premise? What are some of the factors that go into the configuring the cost? Today, it's really mapping into what that cloud platform maps to best on your hardware platform. In the future, we're going to be enabling it to be a lot more configurable depending on the internal, and then we're going to probably separate out more of the different costs as far as compute and storage, and even bandwidth depending on the organizations. But it depends on what organizations want, which level of detail they want the configuration to be at. Yes? So the question is, he has many databases across different clients, and when you want to ask a question across all those databases, CMS or centrally managed servers, something I used a lot back in the day, it'll allow you to run a query, append the server name to there, and you get to see results really quickly across that. Today, it's no ad hoc queries. So depending on what your question is, it might be already answered in there because it is looking at the enterprise down, whether it's data, queries, blocking, jobs, all these different things. But CMS is also a great tool for this, like the quick wins, but you're also limited on like what type of temporary objects you could do and so forth. Yes, yes. Any other questions?
Do we have any questions online? Nope. Okay, we got one in the back.
Yes. So the question is, do we have any experience with legacy applications that have they're expected to be decommissioned or replaced relatively soon? Is there any way to interpret what I call total cost of ownership, right? In a database view, we can tell you the total cost of ownership of that system over, I call it the next 12 months, right? We'll be expanding into the app. But the easiest way for that one, and this is what others are doing today, they're looking at it from, let's add up the cost of the web servers, the database server, and some of the other components. They're putting it in a spreadsheet, and then they're forecasting that cost out. There's nothing automated today, which is why we are developing what we are. But one of the key things is with that, it's what can you also reduce that TC or total cost of operating down to by looking at that 1% as well to make your costs at least lower while that application still stays online.
And with that, we are at time. We do have 2 copies of books that Ben wrote. I'm going to let Ben decide.
I was going to let you.
No.
No, wait. We got 2 books.
Yeah, we have 2.
How about you give one
out? Okay,
out?
I'll give one and you give one. Okay. All right. Don't laugh if I fall off the stage. This is a bit tricky for me.
I'll give one to you. Yes.
Awesome. And then you had several questions, so you get a book. Awesome. And that's it. And if you have more questions, Fortified is a sponsor here. They're right between 3 and 4, gates 3 and 4. So come by and see us, and we'll be happy to answer any additional questions.
Yeah. And thanks for your time today.
Yes, thanks.